Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think I've been listening to all the presentations, and there are a lot of insightful conversations that at least I would say, take with me. I would like to cover, some of the views on the sustainability and from a technology side, what SAP is doing in terms of helping utilities and other businesses to accelerate their sustainability journey. Right? To start with, I'll take this very powerful quote from a book called Ecology of Commerce, which states that business is the only mechanism on the planet today powerful enough to produce the changes necessary to reverse global environments and the social degradation. And I think we all agree, correct? And as a business, we are doing our bit to, let's say, decarbonize our operations, to, I would say, have that equity in our operations taken care of, as well as the other impacts, positive impacts that we make. And if you look at, the very idea of business, running a business is actually creating value for stakeholders, correct? Maybe initially or in the earlier days, stakeholders were only limited to your shareholders who are interested in return on investment they have made. But now the stakeholder definition has expanded, correct? Businesses are creating value for customers by, let's say in the utility context, providing energy at an affordable cost, to suppliers to kind of work with suppliers and providing them a level playing field through, let's say a bidding process, a sourcing process, of course helping them to grow their business and of course create a livelihood through the procurement transaction. Environment, we are all talking about decarbonization. So businesses are today looking at how can they decarbonize their operations, correct? Not only, let's say, the direct emissions that they incur, but also the ecosystem emissions, which is upstream and the downstream. Employees, by offering them, growth opportunities irrespective of the demography they come from, providing equal opportunities is where businesses are creating value for employees. And so as government, where businesses are paying taxes on time, which is then finally getting invested in improving the citizen services, building infrastructure, creating jobs, and so on and so forth, correct? So that's the definition of, let's say, sustainability in the business context, which is creating value for the stakeholders that you work with. Yeah. When you look at utilities and try to maybe look at some of the data here, especially greenhouse gas emissions, I mean, whether we like it or not, but 75% of greenhouse gas emissions is actually coming from this industry, correct? Utilities or energy sector. I would say utilities is part of that for sure, but oil and gas, metals, mining is also part of the energy sector. And if you look at, if you have to achieve the net zero target by 2050, the kind of investment that should pump in, which is around 5 trillion USD, which is massive. And by having this investment, it will also have a positive impact on the GDP, which is of the tune of 0.4%. Yeah. And if you look at the energy transition, the topic that we've been discussing since morning, or since afternoon, I would say, utility will play a very critical role. They will be a catalyst to kind of world to move to a greener future or the green energy. And when you look at India, the potential of renewables, especially solar and maybe wind as well, is around 1,000 gigawatt. And today, we have just realized 16% of it, correct? So there is a huge opportunity in front of us to kind of capitalize on the potential that is there. This was more of a, let's say, data points around utilities and how it is impacting the environment. But then if you look at today, businesses also have to they are under increasing pressures from various stakeholders, especially government, investors, and maybe customers as well, or consumers as well. They want businesses to become more transparent with environmental, social, and the governance issues. And this is an example from a recently released guidelines from IFRS, which is a global standard or global body, which is actually defining how businesses should go about declaring their financials or a financial report, correct? And there is this body called ISSB under that same organization, which has released this standard called S2. And some of these disclosures, if you look at where investors or maybe government in future will start asking businesses, okay, what is the amount or a percentage of the asset or business activities are exposed to climate change related risks. And those who don't know climate change related risks, and I think maybe it may be already known, but there are two types of risk, which is one is a transition risk, another is a physical risk. Physical risk, I think we've all experienced. Nowadays, some of these extreme weather events, chronic weather events are very, very frequent, and which results into damaging of assets, disrupting the supply chain, and that means it has a direct financial impact on the businesses, correct? Transition risk is where government will be more active. They will start imposing taxes on the businesses who are highly polluting or kind of negatively impacting the environment. Transition risk will also come in when there are technology change, and we are seeing that in the renewable space, correct? Tomorrow, hydrogen may disrupt the fossil fuel industry, for an example. And then your business may become unviable or maybe not be, let's say, continued or sustained. Similarly, customers will shift to more and more renewable, products and services. Like today, maybe the B2B customers of yours, they may ask or they may go for a renewable energy, and maybe the fossil fuel-based generation is something that they may not go for, correct? So that's the kind of risk that we are talking about. Similarly, there are opportunities also exist. For an example, hydrogen is a big space. There would be a growing demand going forward, of course, if the economic permits or economic, becomes viable. But there is an opportunity. So businesses would also have to declare that, what is the amount or a percentage of the assets are, let's say, allocated or maybe aligned to the kind of revenue which is coming from the sustainable products and the services. Similarly, the board's remuneration will also be linked to what's the kind of impact you are making, on the environment through your operations, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the regulatory interventions which are going to come. If not today, are mandatory, but definitely in future they're going to come. Yeah. Now, if this is the kind of landscape the utilities are operating, where there is, let's say, they have a big responsibility for world to move to a green future, as well as there are these regulatory interventions which are coming in. The demand from all the quarters are coming in from all the stakeholders. What are some of the key levers that utilities have, or maybe priorities that utilities can take up? So first one is, of course, there is a voluntary commitments that I think most of the utilities or big utilities are making. But there are also regulatory commitments which are coming in, or requirements which are coming in. One such example is in India, if you have heard of business responsibility and sustainability reporting requirement, which SEBI has mandated for top 1,000 companies by their market cap, correct? And here I think most of you come from that bracket of 1,000 companies by market cap. Now, in terms of other priorities, more and more utilities are shifting to, greener portfolio or renewable assets portfolio, correct? We've heard of NTPC who are actually balancing between the fossil fuel-based assets and the renewable assets. Tata Power, maybe not here in this room, but they are actually moving to complete renewables. They are going to phase out, or rather say, completely stop the investment in building any new fossil fuel-based power generation. The third area is in terms of priorities. Today, overnight, you are not going to change, your business model or, your asset base. So you will still continue to operate your asset, but how efficiently you operate those assets so that you have a minimum impact on the environment and the other aspects like social and things like that, where you need to embed sustainability in decision making. And then lastly, there are these new business opportunities which are also coming up. So there is a need to kind of capitalize on those new business opportunities, correct? So these are 4 areas. Maybe I'll just drill down into some of them quickly. So as I said, voluntary and regulatory requirements, these are some examples that are mentioned here. So how technology can help here? So technology can help you, let's say, convert your business activity data into sustainability metrics against which you can define your target, you can set your ambition and help you monitor where are you in your journey, correct? And few example here, let's say greenhouse gas emissions. Scope 3 emissions, which is a value chain emission. So how can you monitor where you stand vis-a-vis the ambitions that you have set for yourself and vis-a-vis the target that you have set for yourself? Now underneath this information, there is a huge amount of information that is already getting captured in your ERP system. For example, if you talk about scope 3 emissions, there are 15 categories of scope 3 emissions, those who know. So first category is purchase goods and services. That means whatever goods and services that you procure, you are indirectly contributing to a greenhouse gas emissions, correct? And those data typically resides within ERP. So how can you actually use those business activity data and then combine it with the emission factor and then convert them into scope 3 emission? Now this information can help you to know where are the hotspots in my value chain, both in upstream and downstream, and then you may come out with some ways or strategies to kind of reduce these emissions, correct? Second example is a water consumption, again on a similar line. Do you need, let's say, investment in zero liquid discharge technologies, looking at the data, correct? Maybe you are not doing good on the goals or the target that you have set for yourself. Incidents, which is aligned to your employee well-being, and maybe one of the social indicators as part of this overall sustainability reporting. The other social KPIs like share of women in the governance body and so on and so forth. If you look at all of these data typically resides in an underlying ERP system, and these are the measures of sustainability. The GHG emission was around environment, the employee health and safety was around social, and of course share of women in governance bodies also around social. That was the first part. The second part is investments in the renewables assets, correct? And since, let's say, you would be investing in building these green assets or a green portfolio, you need a very strong project management capabilities which are integrated with your logistics processes, which are integrated with your finance processes, correct? Also, these projects would be taken up not only basis the financial metrics, but also the kind of impact these projects will have on environment as well as on the other social indicators, correct? That's where some of the technologies, like in SAP we have something called enterprise project and portfolio management, wherein you can create a portfolio or project or come out with a idea or a concept which is aligned to your strategy, and then it can be evaluated basis the financial indicators as well as social indicators as well as the impact on the environment, and finally you take this investment into the execution. Of course, there would be a lot of risk assessment process involved through which you will be able to assess what's the kind of risks that you have and how can you mitigate those risks. Right? Similarly, on embedding sustainability in the core operations. Now, here is where we are talking about how do we run efficiently, how do we reduce the impact on the environment and maybe some other indicators that our businesses kind of touches. Correct? So here is where we can look at, let's say in the supply chain, are you working with suppliers who are actually adhering to the norms that you have set for themselves or for yourselves, which is ESG norms, that if I am sourcing a material from you, you should not be deploying child labor in your operation. Or maybe you should be using renewable energy in your operations. Or you should be fair with your employees in terms of paying your wages on time and so on and so forth. Correct? So that's the supply chain part. On the procurement part, as I said, one of the scope 3 emissions categories is purchase goods and services. can you actually look at all your procurement activity and then calculate the kind of impact it has on the environment in terms of scope 3 emission, which is indirect emission. But then can you drill down and see, okay, which are the material having the highest footprint in terms of absolute value, in terms of intensity, and who are those suppliers who are actually having the highest footprint associated with. What can I do to maybe reduce this emissions or mitigate the emissions that are associated with my supply chain through a procurement process, through a informed decision making. Okay? If I'm running assets which are renewable assets, how can I actually use technology to kind of extract more out of the investment that I have already done? And that's where technologies like advanced analytics, AI, machine learning, IoT can actually play an important role. This is an example from solar power plant where typical KPIs that you monitors are around, let's say, capacity utilization factor and performance monitoring and so on and so forth. Correct? The other example of sustainability and embedding that into the processes is, let's say you are generating electricity. So how would you know that to generate 1 unit of electricity, what has actually gone in terms of emissions? So one example, if it's a fossil fuel based generation, maybe you use coal, you also use electricity for, let's say, some auxiliary related consumption and so on and so forth. So ultimately all your emissions which is coming from these different sources are actually allocated to the per unit of generation that you are making. This is an example from manufacturing industry, but you can imagine on a similar line that everything that actually goes into let's say generating a 1 unit of electricity, all the resources and their environmental impact is being calculated and then getting allocated to a particular unit of electricity. And maybe this can also be used to, let's say, prove the claim that your electricity is greener than the competitor's electricity, and maybe you may want to charge premium to your customers. Correct? The other important aspect is how do you allocate your capital to business activities or initiatives which are helping you to mitigate the climate or rather say climate change related risks or adapt to the climate change related risks. And here you look at how much portion of my capital is getting invested in those set of activities, or how much portion of my OPEX is getting invested in those set of activities, how much revenue is actually associated with the green products and the services that I'm offering. Correct? You can also look at generating a balance sheet out of your carbon accounting data, which is what goes in and what comes out, right? Which is like a financial flow or a material flow. And here in SAP, we are actually working on something called green ledger, which is parallel to the financial ledger. So we'll bring the similar kind of a rigor as you have for your financial closure. So you'll be able to actually track for every transaction what is the carbon impact and what is ultimately is the balance between what comes in and what goes out. Yeah. Lastly, the capitalization on the new opportunities, and I think Mohan did talk about some of this, but these are some of the opportunities where utilities have, especially which is much more sustainable and the need of the hour, I would say, to kind of invest in and then look at how you can monetize as well as meet the decarbonization goals that you have set for yourself. So I'll not get into these details, but there are these new areas which is actually opening up a lot of opportunities. Yeah. Lastly, how SAP can help. So as I said, we are investing a lot in building solutions and capabilities to help our customers across their sustainability journey. And there are different offerings. Maybe we'll not cover that in this session, but anybody who is interested, we can definitely touch base offline. What we do is we work with customers, understand their priorities, where they're coming from, understand the business context in which they are operating, and then the vision that they have around, I would say, let's say, switching to much more sustainable business model and business operations. And then we look at, okay, how SAP can help. And then finally, once everything goes fine, we may start with one small project and then see what is the kind of value that you can get, and then we can scale up or build on top. That's with that, I'll just close my presentation, but happy to take any questions if there are any, or I'm there around. We can always discuss offline. Yeah, thank you very much.